Good afternoon, everyone. On behalf of Burren Beer Trust, you're very welcome to this grand finale of the Burren Winterage weekend. The Cattle Drive, as you know, is the flagship event of the celebration of the tradition of Wintridge in the Burren. This time last year, we were joined by over 700 people in the village of Carrucane with a local farming family, PJ, Fiona and Aoife Forde, as we accompanied them with their herd of cattle up the hills in the Burren. So this year, Cattle Drive is a little bit different. Unfortunately, we can't all be together, but we will virtually enjoy this annual ritual. And we're joined today not just by one farming family, but we are several farmers from the Burren. So I'm going to now hand over to my colleague Brendan Dunford to tell us what's in store for this afternoon.
Thanks very much, Angeli, and welcome everybody. I know we've got visitors from all over the world today, as we normally do for the Cattle Drive. I was just thinking and chatting to the others earlier that around this time we have the likes of Liz Davoren and Mary Howard and my own sister Mary Dunford making tea and serving scones like the new time to all and sundry, and Tom Guthrie in his yellow vests managing the parking, and John Marnon handing out sticks for sale so that people can navigate the way up the mountain with the cattle. And we've usually got the priest on his way across from the church to give the cattle a blessing, and loads of our volunteers in their yellow vests helping to manage the event. It's an absolutely beautiful event and really wonderful in real time. And we'll be back having it in real time again, but this year, obviously because of restrictions and stuff, we can't. But we wanted to bring you the next best thing, a little flavour of Wintridge. So we're lucky, as Pranjali said, to be joined by four wonderful farmers from the Burren, some of you who you might know already. And we're just going to have a chat about Wintridge, the importance of the tradition. And we're going to see some footage from a cattle drove which took place yesterday on the Casey farm in Fanore. And we're very grateful to the Casey family for facilitating that at this time. Some stunning images. We hope to show some of those to you today as well, and we'll make them available online later as well. So lots to look forward to. We'll have contributions from, as I said, 4 different people, and a special contribution from another friend of ours who's a frequent visitor to the Wintridge, who's written a beautiful piece about it. So that'll be our surprise input. So to begin with, I'd like to begin with Michael Davoren, and no better man to begin with. Michael is a local farm leader, community activist, instigator of pretty much everything that happens around here, I think. But first and foremost, Michael is a farmer of many generations in the Burren. So, Michael, you're welcome along. I just wanted to start, Michael, by asking you what do you feel about what is Wintridge, basically? Maybe we start with that. To you, as a farmer in the Burren, what is Wintridge?
I suppose firstly, Brendan, just to follow up, thank you for the introduction. We're very grateful to the FBD for sponsoring the farm walk, and we'd ask all our loyal supporters to support FBD as well. It's great to have them on board, and it's a great fundraiser. In answer to your question, what does Wintridge mean to me? Well, I suppose Wintridge is as a farmer, is my winter feed. It's my silage field, and I suppose silage never hung well in the Burren. Even when we were feeding silage back in the 80s and 90s, we did it out of necessity. I suppose what has always happened is putting the cattle, like what we're doing today, putting the cattle out onto the Wintridge this time of the year. And as a youngster in the 60s, when I grew up, the roads were full of cattle from the fair on the 9th of October and the 4th of November in Kilfanora, where what used to be called store cattle, because that was the big market, exporting frames, what we call frames of cattle, to Britain for finishing for the market there. And the Burren was the ideal place to outwinter them. And the shippers used to come to the Burren every spring to buy hundreds of cattle, and they compete with each other. And it was lovely to hear Morrison last night. Stephen Morrison mentioned that his ancestors came to the west to buy cattle, and the Brutons, Joe Bruton's ancestors, bought a lot of cattle. But of course, us, the farmers that lived here, had to prepare the previous autumn, and all of the fairs and around the Burren, Kilfanora in particular, but Gort and Kinvara and in Estymon as well. All of my ancestors and my neighbours' ancestors would be down there buying store cattle, and they would be walked home, and the roads would be full of cattle walking tail to tail with drovers, walking them into back home to put them out onto the Wintridge. And every day then you would have to go up and tend to them, because some of them wouldn't be used to the Wintridge, and you would have broken limbs, and neighbours would have to be gathered, put them up in a gate and carry them out to the road. And Paddy Healy in Bar was a great cow doctor for setting broken limbs, and it would be set with tar and pitch and bags cut up to make bandages. And that was all part and parcel of farming, being a veterinary surgeon. The old proverb used to be, and still is, I suppose, the eye of the herd is worth both his hands. Because it used to be said a sick animal out in the winter was a dead animal, because by the time you get him down and get him treated, vets were virtually non-existent back then. Nowadays it's all different.
And Michael, I know we've people joining us from all over the world. A lovely comment from Italy. And we'd welcome your comments in the chat box, please. If anybody's any comments, tell us where you're calling in from and what you know about Wintridge. But for people who maybe don't even know about the Burren, it's very rough terrain. Why on earth would you subject cattle to putting them out on that rough hillside over the course of a wet, wild winter? What's from the animal's point of view? It seems a bit harsh.
Well, if you talk about wintering animals, this is the 5-star hotel treatment for cattle, because the cattle are out in the Wintridge. They're doing what they want. They have their shelter belts by the wall and the scrub. They have fresh water. And of course, they have the dry lie, as you always mentioned, and as has been always noted, for the heat of the rock keeps them warm, and they have a lovely coat of hair, and they're free of disease. So there's an awful lot of pluses from the cattle's point of view. From the farmer's point of view, which is a bit more harsh, because you have to go out in all kinds of weather and you don't have the comforts of a static shed. And of course, nowadays we have, thanks to Burren Life, we have access tracks that we can get up onto the hills quite easily to check the cattle. But back then it was all walking.
And Michael, in terms of when the animals are out there, is there much of an issue with broken limbs, with all the clints and grikes and all that kind of thing? And also, do animals actually calve when they're out on the Wintridge?
Oh yeah, a lot of farmers will calve the cows out on the Wintridge. The veterinary surgeons tell us that there's very little calving difficulties out on the Wintridges. Now, I suppose farmers do pick easy calving bulls, to be fair, but there's also the fitness of the cow. A cow that's in a slatted shed just eats, sleeps, and drinks. That's all that they do. Whereas the cow in the Wintridge she has her antenatal class every day, walking around the hills of the Burren, and they're much more fitter and able to calve with greater ease. So,
and as a farmer, Michael, how often would you have to check the cattle on the Wintridge, and would you have to give them much feed, or would you have to, what kind of nurturing and care would you need to give them?
Well, farmers would check cattle on a daily basis. Especially after Christmas, when the snow is on the ground, and if the snow, as we know from science now, farmers knew from experience in the past, the quality goes out of the grass as soon as the hard frost hit, and it comes down to the level of straw, and that's when the Burren ration comes into its own. In the pastures would have been hay, and there would be ricks of hay built out in the summertime out on the Wintridge, and some of that would be given when there was snow on the ground, that kind of thing, or a supplementary feed as necessary. Nowadays it's 2 kilograms of the Burren ration. Of course, the type of farming has changed, as I was saying, from dry stock, who didn't know the Burren, and that was much more difficult to farm, and much more casualties with injuries to animals. Whereas the cows that grow up in the place and live for maybe a decade, having a calf every year, they know their way around the Wintridge better than ourselves, and like that makes life much easier for the farmer nowadays.
That's very interesting. So I was just wondering, because some of these Wintridges are quite large, Michael. So how do cattle know where to go and find water, to find the best forage? How do they navigate? Because they're quite, even for a person on foot with a GPS, you can get lost fairly easily. How did the cattle know the way around those Wintridges?
Well, you know, the cattle walk around, as Sharon always tells us, with the cutting of the scrub. Cattle tend to walk around, check the boundaries of a farm on a very regular basis. They go around in a circle, because they're great judges of food, and they pick the best bite of grass every day. So they always graze in a Wintridge on the move. And like they keep moving around in a circular fashion. They don't like coming back in themselves. And of course, the fact that they have to go to a certain point to get the water every day makes them move from where they're finding the forage to where they're finding the grass. And I suppose the good herdsmen, the old-fashioned herdsmen of old, the Tom Carty was a great herdsman, Lord rest him, over in Mount Carn. Like, the first thing they do when they got out in the morning was see what direction the wind was from, because they would know the cattle would have the shelter found, and that's most likely where you'd find them. So, you know, the cattle get to know the shelter spots, and we get to know the shelter spots by finding the cattle. So.
And I suppose that, as you said before as well, they pass it down from generation to generation, the cattle, so the mothers will pass it to the daughters, the knowledge of the winters, so that's another thing. And is that knowledge still there, Michael, amongst the farming community, the herders today, you know, the old traditions of herding and where to look for the cattle and how to manage them, is that still strong in the community, that type of knowledge, or have people moved down to the lowlands now and kind of started to move away from the winter tradition?
Oh, it is. Oh, it's very much. Farmers are very much aware of it. Well, you will even educate yourself. If it wasn't handed down to you, you will learn by experience yourself. You'll begin to realise after you've walked for an hour and a half looking for the cattle and you find them in the shelter. That's a lesson well learned. You remember that the next day. So farmers, and of course, everything evolves, and so does farming, and even the way we farm, like driving up with a jeep or a tractor now and feeding the cattle. The cattle come to the feed anyway. The hardest time of the year to herd the cattle is from now until we start feeding. When you start feeding the cattle, they're creatures of habit. They'll come, they know what time you'll feed them, and they'll come to meet, they'll be there waiting for you every morning. And if you don't come at the same time every day, the cattle disperse and go looking for feed themselves, and it's much more difficult to feed them. You know, if you change from morning to evening, if you're out by an hour and a half or 2 hours, it makes it much more difficult to herd.
Fantastic. And just last question, Michael. So I suppose what you're saying is that wintrages, I mean, they're free forage, and I think a lot of farmers elsewhere in Ireland are kind of jealous of the fact that you have free food for the cattle for the winter, and that underfloor heating system and the calcium-rich water. But I suppose the cost of it is the time spent herding. So as a farmer, do you see the future of wintrages being a positive one, given that people are busy now and there's a lot of off-farm work, and these wintrages, they're tough enough places to farm? Do you see a good future for the likes of the wintrage that you farm?
There will always be a future for farming and the Burren. I could never see a time when there won't be. And I think more and more, even looking at the present cap, I mean, the more environmental farming comes into, it's now coming into its own. And like, as I've often said in the past we earned a living from the livestock, and the environment that we left behind was a byproduct that we didn't even know about. In the future, we're managing the environment, grazing out the rank grasses with the cattle, and it's the cattle that'll be the byproduct, because the environment is the product that can't be reproduced anyplace else, and society want it, and they're prepared to pay for it. And I've no doubt the government here will make sure that they're duty bound anyway, but they will make sure that there's a future for farming in the Burren, because tourism needs it as well. And when we come back to normal times, I'm sure everything will come back to an even keel.
Thanks very much, Michael. It's fascinating. I first met Michael at his farm in Kilcorny, Kilfanore, about 20 years ago now, Michael. And like Wintridge was new to me at that point as well. But when I was there as a student, I was just looking, as Michael said there, about, you know, the impact of Wintridge on the biodiversity of the Burren. And really, to sum up 3 years of work in a sentence, without that winter grazing regime, you just wouldn't have the amount and the diversity of plant species, gentians, orchids, mounted avens that you do have in the Burren, because of course when the cattle leave in spring and go back onto the lowlands, the flowers begin to appear. So it's a phenomenally important tradition from the point of view of biodiversity. So thank you, Michael. And we might move west a little bit now, over to Blackhead. So those of you that know the Burren well from driving, if you journey from Ballyvaughan west, you'll come around this beautiful place called Blackhead. And as you look left up the hill, you're looking at the land of the Casey family. And the Casey family are the most wonderful, generous, fantastic family you can ever meet. I used to know Shane's grandfather, Jack, who was a mine of information back in the day. And also I fondly remember his father, Joe, not only for the fact that every time I met Joe, magically a pint of Guinness appeared in my hand. So he's such a generous guy, and he's a sad loss to us all, I think, Joe. And I met his wife, Maureen, yesterday, and she's in great form. So hi, Maureen, as well. But I wanted to chat to the next generation now, Shane Casey. So Shane, you're very welcome along. I'm so glad you could join us. I think you're calling from Fanore today.
I'm calling from Fanore, and believe it or not, it's actually raining fairly heavily here at the moment, and I think you hear a bit of thunder, so I'm kind of glad to be inside rather than outside in the middle of a cattle drive today. So welcome from Fanore.
Thanks very much, Shane. Yeah, we were over that way yesterday, and it was sunny, but my God, it was blustery, and there was a few heavy showers as well. So I think we're glad to have the shelter of our own homes this morning. Shane, you were born and bred in Fanore. Could you tell us a little bit about your family, your area, and growing up in the Burren as a son of a farmer?
I can, like I say, grew up in here in Fanore. The bulk of our farm is Blackhead Mountain that you'll see as you drive along from Fanore to Ballyvaughan. And with pockets of greenland close to the sea, close to the house, and we farm middle land in the Carr Valley and Carrucane and Bell Harbour as well. But the bulk of our land is Blackhead Mountain. There's 5 in my family, 3 boys and 2 girls, and like I say, I lived next door to grandfather, Jack. So we kind of grew up out on the farm, thankfully, and we have quite a lot of mix of different animals. The main is sucklers. We'd have mainly short-horn suckler cows, and with a purebred Shirley herd as well. Although we do like breeds, so you'll notice in the videos later on that there's a couple of different breeds. We always like trying something new and seeing how to get on, but we normally go back to the short-horns. They work best for us. We also have sheep. We've a few purebred blocks, Suffolks, Galways, which are a rare breed, and a few Texas, and then we've horses, ponies, donkeys, we've poultry, goats, a bit of everything really. So growing up on Blackhead, there was always kind of something going on, and very often probably some of the best memories is in springtime when there'd be something newborn, particularly a foal, they'd be brought back down to the back door for everyone to see before they're moved on to the next place. So you very often be called to the back door to see a newborn horse foal or a lamb or a calf or something like that. So we're very much involved in it, and thankfully the 2 boys are still here actively on the farm, as well as their own jobs, and I hope when I get a chance I come home as much as I can to help out as well.
Because Shane is and we might have some images from Donald anytime you want, Donald. Shane is an unusual farmer in the sense, the fact that he actually works away from home quite a lot. I think as biodiversity officer under the local authorities in Dublin, Shane, but also, as we'll find out in a minute, as an author of several children's books. But Shane, going back to the farm and growing up on the farm, what were the kind of jobs that you were dragged into doing? Because I'm from a farming background myself, and there's always seemed to be something to do. So growing up as a youngster in the Burren, what kind of jobs were you given, or did you have to participate in?
Yeah, most of the jobs were done on foot or by hand. Our land would be fairly inaccessible for machinery. So if we go herding, it's usually over to Blackhead. The bit of Blackhead Mountain that's closer to the house is used more regularly. It's kind of flat, so animals kind of move over and back. So you might be sent over to herd cattle or to herd sheep, and move them around. Most animals are moved by foot, like we did yesterday. By hand as well, up on spring morning to check and see if there's yost lamb in the shed, or pulling lambs and stuff like that. I might be, I don't know whether it's lucky or unlucky that just as I was very young, my family got out of the more mixed farming in terms of tillage and turnips and potatoes that my father and grandfather would have worked on. We were kind of farming was changing at that time, and it moved more towards the sucklers and sheep and horses. But summertime was also quite busy for us because we like show animals. Father he's always bring bulls and rams and horses to the agricultural shows around North Clare and South Galway. So we always kind of enjoyed it. That was our days out growing up, was going to the shows. I'm not sure my mother was a massive fan that came with us and brought the picnic and looked after us down there as well while my father was showing animals. So that's a great memory, but it was very hands-on.
Yeah, and we're just seeing some images as you speak, Shane, of some of the work involved in fixing the walls and in herding the cattle around. And I know your family are always very involved in farming in Fanore as part of the Mehels. I always recollect Fanore as being a great place where people came together when there's a big job of work to be done, whether it be saving the harvest or, you know, whatever it might be. And I guess you're roped into that as well, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely. There's always a wall to be built somewhere. My grandfather was great for sending us off to rise a few gaps and a few walls. We've about 12 miles of walls on the farm, so there's always a gap somewhere. During the summertime, we small square bales of hay, like you say. We'd always have a lot of neighbours coming along to help us bring in the hay, and in turn, my father and my brothers now as well, they're very good stock people. When anytime we have a neighbour has a cow that's typically in calving, it's very often my brothers or my father before them that were called. So it's great. Like I say, great community spirit in terms of the helping each other out on the farm. I know our neighbours where we have kind of land away from the house will always keep an eye on the stock for us as well up in the Car Valley and Barber and other places. And that's important because you're covering quite huge expansive areas. Our farm can run to, I think, over 800 acres, which is quite an area to cover. And while we do it, and thankfully there's a few of us around to help do that, it's also important to have a few neighbours to throw an eye, and we do that for them as well when we get a chance.
12 miles of stone wall. Oh my God. Can you imagine the work involved? And these aren't there for fun, folks. These are there as important boundaries to keep cattle where they should be. So that alone, Shane, is a massive amount of work. And I think what you described there in terms of your farming system, we often talk about the food production and the environment, but I mean, the social dimension of farming is so important. And I think your family aren't just an isolated family, you're part of a very vibrant community. And we're going to speak to some other people from that community in a little while as well to talk about Fanore. But I'm going to give you a break, Shane, because I want to bring in another speaker, Aoife Forde. Aoife is a wonderful young farmer. We're moving back east now toward the High Burren and the village of Carrucane and Kilnaboy. And Aoife Forde was our host for last year's cattle drove. And Aoife is sitting in her car at the top of a mountain to get better broadband reception. Aoife, you're very welcome along. Great to have you here.
Thanks very much, Brendan. Yeah, the internet situation isn't great, so I'm actually up here in the Wintridge at the moment to get good 4G, so to be able to join you today. And
are your cattle up in the Wintridge at the moment, Aoife, or have they gone up yet?
No, not yet. They're on Craig area on the mountain down at home, so they'll probably be there for about another maybe 3 weeks or so, and then they'll be heading up to the Wintridge, up where they were on the cattle drive last year.
And now, Aoife, people will show some images in a little while, in a couple of minutes, of last year's cattle drove, which was utterly spectacular. And your Wintridge equally so. It's one of the best Wintridges in the Burren in terms of its biological condition. It's fantastic. Could you describe your farming system, like the lowland and the upland, and the Wintridge, how big it is and how long the cattle spend there and how many of them?
Yeah, so I suppose in total we have about 45 suckler cows, and so it starts off with I suppose in springtime when the cows calf, they come down home. They go to spend their summer then down in the lowlands, in the rich meadows and the green grass, and they stay there till about September time, and then we wean the calves from the cows. And following on from that then, I suppose the cows they go into kind of rougher areas of Craig and on the mountain down at home. And then from then onwards, from probably the end of October, middle of November onwards, they go up then onto the Wintridge. So I suppose in total we have about 90 acres of Wintridge. It's in 2 different sections. And I suppose they then spend their time there from November until March. And most years we would calf our cows up in the Wintridge because it's a great dry lie for them. You know, like Michael said there, the cows are very, very fit. The majority of times, thank God, you go up, you find cows have calved, calves are up sucking, you know, that you don't have to intervene at all. And I think sometimes the more you try and help a cow, you're probably as well off to staying away and let her doing it herself, because the majority of times, thank God, that they will do that, because like Michael said, they're very, very fit. And I suppose, like Michael was saying as well, you know, it's a good area of ground. You could have 20 cows in 50 acres of ground, and you could start walking the gate, and you might have no idea where they are. But as Michael said, as you herd cattle and as you look at the weather and conditions and all the rest of it, you'll have a fair idea of where the cows are going to be on any given day, depending on weather conditions, etc.
And how do you manage, for instance, up there, Aoife, for water? Is there springs, or there's not many rivers in the Burren, as we know, or streams. So how do you manage for water with the cattle?
So it's mainly in one section it's mainly springs that would supply the cattle with water, and on the top Wintridge where we were last year for the cattle drive, there's actually a tank that we built through the Burren Life programme because there had been no water in that Wintridge, and that was a really big problem because there might be water there. There was an old rainwater harvesting tank there, but that might supply water for maybe 3 months of the year, and cattle would have to come down then in February because there wouldn't be water for them anymore, etc. So we built a tank under the Burren Life, and that's just been fantastic. And there's water all year round for the cattle there.
And so, as with a lot of farms in the Burren and the Aran Islands, our neighbours, rainwater harvesting is a big issue and has been for many years. And tell me, if when the cattle calve out there, the young calves, are they not very exposed? Is it not very cold and wet for them? Are they weak or are they strong for virtue of being born outside like that?
It's amazing. The majority of times, like I say, you go up, you find cows, they're calves are standing up, they're flying around. Cows by their nature, they're very intelligent animals. They're not going to calve outside in a bleak spot. A cow will go off away, she'll pick a corner for herself and she'll calve away, and she'll mind her calf for maybe 2 days. She'll stay away from the herd, she'll mind her calf, she'll make sure he's good and strong, and then she'll bring him back to the herd when he's ready to go. And to be honest, it's something, I suppose, that a lot of farmers miss out on. When you have a cow inside in a shed, she might calf in an area straw bed, and you let her back in. But I suppose in the Burren, we actually get to see, I suppose, cows in their natural environment, what they'll actually do. Like I say, it's very easy to know. You'll be up feeding your cows, whatever, you'll count and you'll realize there's a cow missing, and then you have to go off walking searching for that cow to find her. And normally you'll find that cow either calving or she'll be calved, and she'll have a lovely spot pick for herself, and she'll work away, she'll do the job, and like I say, maybe 2 days later she'll reunite herself and her calf with the herd, and there's usually no issues because the calves are very hardy. They have a good dry lie on the limestone, and their mothers, they're well able to look after them.
And they'll follow the mother around, they'll suckle the mother, and they'll come down with the mother then, probably around March or April. Is that the time you bring them back down, Aoife?
Yeah, usually. So normally, when we do calf our cows in the Wintridge, we'd probably leave them there for maybe the most of a week or so, just so the calf gets good and strong, and then our calves will probably then walk down with their mothers, maybe a mile down the road then, and then the cows will be fed silage, and they'd be fed nuts for a couple of weeks before they're let out onto grass. So I suppose it's probably that week period where they're just getting strong enough to make the journey home.
Now, Aoife, you're an inspirational, young, well-educated, I think you're doing a master's at the moment, farmer. What future do you see in this type of farming? Because it is a bit of a slog, as you describe it, herding a big amount of land in a cold, wet winter's day, looking for a newborn calf, maybe, and probably not that lucrative at the scale in which you operate in the Burren, even with 45 suckler cows, which would be a little bit above average, I guess. So what draws you to it, and do you see a future for yourself as a farmer in the Burren?
Well, I suppose what draws me, I suppose, is this is something that, like I say, it's happened in the Burren for years, and I just look around and you look at all the stone walls in the Burren, and you look at all the different archaeological features, and you can literally see every farmer that has farmed that landscape before you, and that they've left their mark on the Burren. And I think it's so important, that these traditions are continued on. And I suppose when I'm up in the Wintridge herding cattle, you might be up there and there could be nobody within a 2-mile radius of you. There could be no other human being, and it's just you and the cows up there. And I really do find that there's a great sense of peace, calm, there's a great sense of magic about the Burren area itself. I even think this year, the world is just turned upside down. It's completely different to what it was this time last year, but you still some things remain the same. Like cows are still going to go to the Wintridge. Doesn't matter what pandemic is in the world. It's a tradition. It's something that happens every year. I suppose it is, like you say, a hard slog. You know, it's not the most lucrative thing. If you look out the window now, currently it's pelting rain here beside me, and you know, and there has been days you just have to put on your oilers, your coat and your cap, and off you have to go, and you might be out walking for an hour. And it is, I suppose, someone looking in might say, what are you, you're absolutely stone mad, like why would you do that? That's just utter hardship. But I suppose I really do it for the love of it, as do all farmers in the Burren. Like, you know, you really have to love your animals and enjoy what you're doing. And I suppose in terms of a future, like Michael said, you know, the environment, it's so important. And what we're doing is very unique. It's very, very special. We're looking after the environment. So, you know, I think it all goes in hand. And, you know, we are farmers, but we're custodians of the land, and it's all about looking after the environment. And going forward, I suppose we might be able to diversify in some way to maybe sell products from the Burren, to make more of a farming income, I suppose, because at the moment it would be a case that it would be and you'd be farming, and then you'd also have to have an off-farm income just to I suppose to sustain. So I suppose going forward we'll have to look and see, maybe there's other opportunities there that we just haven't explored yet.
Fantastic answer. Might ask you one last question, Aoife, in context of the weekend conference that we just had. When it comes to all this, you know, the climate and biodiversity crisis, do you see yourself as a farmer as being part of the problem or as being part of the solution?
I would actually say part of the solution, because I have, like you say, I've completed a master's recently, and I actually worked down in Kerry, in the heartland of dairy country. And I suppose I was just out in farms, and I was looking at these farmers who are doing a fantastic job. They're producing milk and grass, but I suppose what they're all about is production, and how they can push and get more and more out of the land. And of course that's what they have to do, because that's their living. But I suppose when I look at them and I look at what we're doing, I think it's very, very different. And you know, that I walked into their yards, there might be 30 or 40 ton of fertilizer. You know, if you go into our yard at home, there could be 2 ton of fertilizer that will do the farm for the year. You know, and I think we have the right idea in what we're doing. We're very low input system, low output system. We're looking after the environment. I suppose there's a huge range of biodiversity. I just think in springtime, when you're walking up in the Burren, you know, maybe in late April, May, you're literally falling over the range of biodiversity that there is, and all the species of flora that there are. So I suppose I would see us as part of the solution. And I think there is, with some help, there could be other farmers throughout Ireland that could also become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. And I think the way forward is like locally led schemes, so that people can look at their own unique area and customize a plan that suits their needs and their area.
That's a phenomenal answer, Aoife. Thank you so much. It's really brilliant. And I think just on your last point, we had a lovely evening last evening with some Farming for Nature ambassadors across Ireland, and more than yourself, they give you great hope for the future, and they tell a very different story from the negative one that we tend to hear most often. So thank you so much. We're gonna give everybody a little break with a little interlude now. Some of you might tune in to something called Sunday Miscellany every Sunday morning. I love it. It's a lovely, gentle start to your Sunday. So we're going to have our own little miscellany now, courtesy of a regular visitor to the Burren and a regular attendee at the Cattle Drive, Shirley Clerkin from Monaghan. So Shirley's got a lovely 6-minute reflective piece on Wintridge. And while Shirley speaks and recites her piece, I'm going to share some images, PowerPoint images, some of which include the cattle drove from last year with Aoife and her family and the 700 or 800 people who joined. So I'm going to share my screen, and Shirley, I'm going to hand over to you, and hopefully people can see my PowerPoint. So once I start to show, Shirley, maybe you can begin.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so can everybody see that?
Yeah.
Okay, Shirley, I think you're good to go. You're very welcome along, and thanks for joining us today. And we're looking forward to hearing your piece.
Thank you. Wintridge. In late October, between the fresh faces of parallel limestone walls I walked with the comfort of a stout hazel stick in hand. The muted colours of the Clare Burren murmured with the quiet chatter of several hundred people. We were enthusiastically following our very own Pied Piper, young farmer Aoife Forde and her 21 cattle, from the little village of Carrucane as they ascended to their rich Burren Winterage pastures to spend the winter months. Before we departed our starting point at Carrucane National School, Aoife stood gloriously like Queen Maeve herself, but on the top step of the fire escape on the side of the school, and proclaimed that we were all farmers for the day. Attending the Burren Winterage weekend for the previous few days, I'd immersed myself in the sinuous, rocky landscape, the conference presentations, workshops, and farm walks. Several kilometres into the herding parade, as we reached the grassy summit, an earlier comment by another Burren farmer, Oliver Nagel, that every bit of land is good for something, got me thinking. Land on this island has been measured, mapped, valued and paid for using the standard units of acres, perches and roods for several years, 100 years now. These acres nestle within a hierarchy of tates and townlands, outlined at first on paper maps and now on complex computer geographical information systems. The early cartographers who were commissioned to distill an economic maximum for their English masters used this standard, replacing the traditional method that was used by the Gaelic Irish, a method based on the eye and experience. An intimate knowledge of the landscape entwined family genealogy, place lore, folklore, songs and poems with named landmarks and routeways. A holistic virtual mind map of places and their intrinsic cultural and natural values was summoned in this way. Land was inscribed with meaning and layers of perspectives by its people. This was acquired by walking, looking, learning, knowing and sharing the Shankish or history and place lore. These were the skills used for assessing boundaries, the size of areas and their land use potential or carrying capacity. It was a respected heritage that was passed on through tribes and families. It was conjured from thin air, from an oral tradition that had sustained its mysteries and knowledge for thousands of years. Carrying capacity is a term used in our modern world to describe the number of people, animals, or crops a region can support without causing environmental degradation. Essentially, it determines the natural limits of a place based on its soil, ecology, position, and topography. Land in the Irish tradition was measured in these terms, so the number of cows and related cattle herd a place could sustain was passed on through the hereditary knowledge lines. Burren Winterage pastures were usually rented or sold based not on their acreage, but on the number of stock they could support over winter. The townland names subsumed the nature of the terrain, so bog, meadow, marsh, hill, ridge, mountain, wood, arable, stony and pastoral remain common words, still fossilized in place names today. The visual delineation on maps by the cartographers in the 16th and 17th centuries made Ireland tangible and visible, emergent from its mythical status of stories, folklore, heroic journeys and hereditary kinship landholdings. This facilitated the subsequent felling of forests, draining of bogs, transfer of land to outsiders, placing of military defences, and creation of a new economic model. The Shankish or place lore and the Brehon laws protecting trees were subsidiary to the new way. Information was collected from the locals to draw these maps, but the full depth of their mental archive was not made real. But a strategy to alter an Indigenous culture does not happen onto a cultural blank slate. So fragments of land knowing remain both in place names and with people. People like these farmers in the Burren, particularly those who were interviewed and consulted when starting the Burren farming programme, who insisted that bringing the cows to the uplands in the winter enabled the carrying capacity of the land to be respected and fulfilled. The Burren farming programme tapped into this knowledge and reinstated the importance of the traditional practice of grazing the uplands during the winter months, allowing the cattle to have a dry lie on limestone, to drink the calcium-rich water, and to happily munch the mixed sward. This allows the full value of the land to be retained as food for animals in the winter, and in the spring as a boost for biodiversity, when the light sward lets wildflowers ping up in all their spring gentian and bloody cranesbill glories, sustaining the region's rare species-rich pastures. Unfortunately, our technocratic outlook blinded us from this indigenous knowledge for many years, so that we forgot these ancient precedents. But there are signs that a new understanding is spreading. There were hundreds of people following the way of the cows along the Boher Glass to the Wintridge on the sunny October Sunday, keen to find out more about the landscape, nature, and culture of the farming in the Burren. A real appetite for knowledge and a wish to be part of a cultural farming tradition and to support nature farmers prevailed in the conversations. It was hopeful to feel the solidarity and to witness a young woman farmer on her very own epic journey.
Sorry, Brendan, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Shirley. That was absolutely fantastic. Just to let people know that Shirley only discovered 1 hour ago that she was going to be doing this. So Shirley, fantastic job. And it was just perfect, I think, for the day that's in it. So thank you so much. I'm going to go back now to Shane for a moment, and Donald again, if you want to share some images. Shane, we just wanted to talk to you a little bit now about the actual movement of the cattle, the Wintridge itself, and yesterday when we were with you in the Burren, you were moving the cattle. So this year, could you tell us about the numbers of cattle that you were moving and the journey itself, what's involved in bringing the cattle up?
Yes, we moved 24 animals yesterday. There were 12 year-and-a-half heifers and 12 2.5-year-old springers. And we bought them from around the house, as you can see, right up to the top of Blackhead Mountain. If you didn't have cattle in front of you, it's a good half-hour walk all the way uphill. Yesterday, I think it was a little over an hour with the cattle in front of us. We have to take our time because, unfortunately, we don't have any tracks or trails or green roads going up to this Wintridge. It's all cross country. You're following the line of the walls, stone walls, for most part. Then once you get about halfway up, you'll hit a couple of very big stones, big erratics, and that's kind of a landmark to go crossways to Craig, and then you come across a very narrow track through a very fast limestone pavement, and there's one little narrow path that the animals can walk through. If they miss it, you have to go a very long way around. So it's quite uneven, quite rocky. Be very careful with your footing. So the main thing is to take your time and let the animals kind of find their own footing along the way. Once you get up there, then after the hour walk, it's a big 200-acre odd field with a stone wall all around it, and that stone wall needs to be checked to make sure it's still stock proof. You have to bring the cattle over to water. We're lucky we have spring lines along the centre of the Wintridge, but we bring the younger animals over because the older animals were up that route last year, and thankfully they remembered yesterday and taught the younger ones, so the younger ones will go up again next year, and hopefully that learning tradition will continue on down through the different animals. It's worked so far for us over many years, and hopefully it continue working for a long time to come for the older animals, teaching the younger ones. And that journey has to be done every week from here until the next February, March. The older springers will come back down in February when they get close to calving, and the younger animals will stay up there a bit longer until grass is ready for them. So that journey has to be done every week. You have to find the animals in the field first of all, and make sure they're okay, and then check water, grazing, walls, and so on. And that's only one Wintridge for us. That's only for a year and a half, 2.5-year-old heifers. We have another one for younger yearling heifers, weaning heifers, and another one for older cows, and a couple of other smaller Wintridges where we move cows around depending on how they're getting on grazing. So your entire week can be spent going up and down to Wintridge, just checking animals and making sure they're okay, and staying where they should be, and being healthy the way that they should be. And on our farm as well, we obviously have sheep and horses and a few other things, so it's a fairly busy time of the year. But thankfully they all found their way up yesterday. Hopefully they'll stay where they're supposed to for the winter. Hopefully the grazing and the water and so on will continue to allow them to stay up there for the winter.
And Shane, as you speak, we're looking at the footage from yesterday. Hopefully people's bandwidth is sufficient to see it. I mean, it's not just beautiful, it's almost iconic. But I was up there about a week ago with you looking at the route, and I thought great, and I came back yesterday and I couldn't for the life of me find out where I was going. So when you say the cattle, because you're all behind the cattle, they seem to know the way themselves, but that's actually passed down from generation of animal to generation, is it?
It is. Like I say, it's the older animals, and they're only 2.5-year-old springers. They've only been up there the once, but they remember. Not sure how they manage it, but thankfully they do. For us, for myself and Raymond and Kieran, walking up, obviously we've been doing it for long enough, so we know what walls to keep up along and what areas to take a turn on. But thankfully the cattle know as well. And hopefully that kind of learning will continue, because it's, like I say, we don't have greenways or routes like that. We have to follow the line of the wall, to follow the rack, and find the path through the Craig, and then onto the Wintridge. So it's a nice journey up. Once you get up there, the views back down are, like you say, they're incredible. It's kind of it makes it a bit special when you get up there and look around and see where you've come from. So that's always a great thing to see. Thankfully it stayed dry and the sun was shining for us yesterday while we're coming up, although it got a bit wet and windy as we were coming back down. But like I said, it has to be done every week during the winter time, and we won't always get sunshine, but it still has to be done.
It still has to be done, and it's amazing. It's an amazing event to be involved with, because I mean, that trek is a good hour's walk up there to get onto the Wintridge. I mean, when you're herding a few times a week, and when you're up there, you're facing the Atlantic, and the weather turns on a whim. It could be fine one minute, next minute there's a downpour, so it's highly unpredictable. Just looking at the images as well, Shane, normally during the cattle drove, people think this isn't so bad, it's a nice open green road. But bear in mind, normally when we have maybe 800 or 900 people following the cattle, we have to choose a route which is suitable for that purpose. But yesterday was a more authentic cattle drove, in the sense that you're really traveling across bare rock, really incredibly rough ground, as the footage showed, but the cattle well able to manage, no problem.
They are. I lost my footing up there a couple of times yesterday as well, and I'm well used to it too. There are plenty of holes, plenty of stones to get tripped on, and so on. But like I say, the most important thing when you're bringing cattle to the Wintridge is just to stand back from them and let them find their footing in that setting. It's not the roughest route we have. I remember bringing a walk up in Capawally Mountain up to the Wintridge up there, and that's straight uphill. There's no back and forth. It's straight uphill, and that has to be done every week as well for the older cattle during the winter.
And I think as you stand up on top, thank you very much, Shane, it's fascinating. As you stand on top where the Wintridge is, you're looking down at the Carrucane Ergus, you're looking at all those field wall systems, you're looking out toward the Aran Islands. And the place is just full of these beautiful glacial erratics, full of biodiversity in between the rocks, and full of folklore and history as well. And I think Fanore in particular is blessed to have some great local historians, by which I mean people who just love their place and are fascinated by it and are proud of it and proud to share the story about it. And one of those is with us today. Many of you will know Pepsi Kurukin. Patsy is a farmer. He's also a farm advisor, one of the planners with the Burren Programme, a fantastic man in terms of natural and cultural heritage. So Patsy, I was going to maybe ask you to tell us a little bit about the area as shown in the pictures and about the history and heritage with it, associated with it. So you're muted there, Patsy, and we'll let you in.
Okay, Brendan, can you hear me?
Can hear you loud and clear, Patsy. Good to see you.
Thanks very much for inviting me today, and it's so wonderful to see the Wintridge walk coming back to Marook, and the Casey family who are synonymous with farming in Blackhead for years and years and years. They go back to before records began, so there's a long number of a lot of generations of the Casey family who have been farming in Blackhead since long before the famine. So it's congratulations to them, and it's a wonderful sight and lovely pictures there of the top of Blackhead. I suppose Marook, Fanore really is called Fanore now, but you know in the old days it used to be called Marook because when people went to town they were called Marook people. I suppose it was because the village, the centre of the village was sort of in that area. Marook itself is like three separate townlands: Marook Tuhi North, Marook Tuhi South, and Marook Killy. And Marook Tuhi North is where the cattle drive was there that you see all the lovely pictures of. Now, it covers, I suppose, maybe over 2,000 acres. And it was originally the McNamara family from the landlords from what is now the Falls Hotel in Innisdiamond. They were the landowners of at least Marook Tuhi North and Marook Tuhi South. I think there was a different landlord in Marook Killy, but where some of my family came from. But the Caseys were tenant farmers, and of course, as time went by, they came to own a lot of the area around Blackhead. And of course, the lighthouse is on their farm, and Jack Casey, Shane's grandfather, he was the lighthouse keeper there in Blackhead for, I suppose, since it was built back in around 1935 or 1936. Jack Casey was the lighthouse keeper, and he would have to cycle over there morning and evening. I think an hour before dusk, I think, and an hour after dawn. He'd have to light the lighthouse and then turn it off. Of course, it's all solar now, but also just quite close to the lighthouse there is the ERA sign, which many people don't know it's there, but it is very very well maintained. The ERA signs were put all around the country during the time of World War II, from County Louth right around to Donegal. I think there was something like 80 something of them, and the one in Blackhead there is number 48. So the number is on it as well as the ERA sign. So, and it's very very clear from the air and very well maintained. So that's the story of Marook. But I suppose Fanore is more, nowadays is more commonly called Fanore, but that's because the focus of the village, I suppose, has changed since I suppose that change started when we got an invention, which was called a pub. So about 1911, 1912, and gradually since then, quite a number of houses have been built around in the vicinity of the pub. So the focus of the village now is more in the where the pub is.
Patsy's also a great singer. I'm not going to ask you to sing now, Patsy, unless you want to.
Thank God for that.
you had one lovely song about the townland names, and it was like a song line almost. You were singing your way through the townland. Give us some of those names, Patsy, and any the translations of them, if you have them off the top of your head, from Blackhead down.
Well, of course, Blackhead itself is Ceann Borna, which is the Burren Head, which is sticks out on the northwest tip of County Clare, and it's a very prominent headland, and that's why the lighthouse was built there. And it has clear views of all in along the bay, as well as out towards the ocean and the Aran Islands. Then I think the area there that I saw Raymond and Johnny and Shane bringing the cattle up there is called the Glown Moor, I think. I could be wrong about that now, but I think it is. And they had to pass a lovely well there called Tubarookter. But then across the river divides Fanore from Baruch, and the Capper River, which is the only overground river in the Burren. And across the river on the mountain there is a place called Craignavado, which is a beautiful name. When you go up on top there, you'll hear lots of whistles. So it's called Craignavado. Down towards the sea, then you have names all along the seashore for different areas. Trollnagon is the one, we say, the main area over around Casey's land there in Blackhead, and back along then you have Trawee, and you have Powellhugh, and Travelaholika is another one, not too far from me here. It's the strand at the mouth of the little cliffs.
Amazingly descriptive name, huh? Beautiful.
Yeah, they are fantastic.
And Patsy, just one last word. You mentioned the Caher River there, and of course, a lot of people will be aware of John O'Donoghue, who is much loved, not just in the Burren and Clare and in Ireland, but all over the world. And I think you went to school with John, didn't you?
I did indeed. We were the same age. John was like going to school even when we'd go out at lunchtime. John will say, "Come on over here and we'll sit in a rock and talk about olden times." Of course, I mean, I just wanted to kick a football or stuff like that. But he was a great man for, even at that time, that young age, for reading books, and we often shared a few books. My grandmother always wanted me to read books, but I'm afraid I disappointed her in that respect.
But he had a lovely piece once about working with his father, building a wall, and then leaning over the gate at the end of the day to admire their handiwork and the sense that came with it. Yeah,
of course, there's something very peaceful about building walls, and I think it's and a great sense of a sort of achievement, or I think it's just, I don't know, it might be backbreaking. And you mightn't like it from that point of view, but like Shane says, they have 12 miles of wall. I have maybe 8 or 10 myself. It's tough going at times, but when you do it and you look at what you've done, I think there's a great sense of just keeping the heritage alive and keeping it going and making sure that it's there for the next
generation
time to come along.
That's it. Patsy, a pleasure as always to talk to you. And I know Burren Bio have monthly walks, and Patsy's always been a very generous host, and he hosted the cattle drove himself 2 years ago to spectacular effect. You'll see some of the images I've shown earlier. So thanks as always, Patsy, for your support. I just want to go back before the last maybe input from Shane, and we have a few more images to share from yesterday's cattle drove. So I'll bring Shane back in if you're with us, Shane.
Yes.
And maybe Donald, if you've got a few images to share. So I just wanted to kind of talk to finish off, Shane, about now the cattle are in, the wall has been closed behind them. So you've got your, I think it's about 25 cattle on about 200 acres of land. So what's it going to be like from here on out now that the cattle are up there, Shane? I know yourself and Raymond, your brother, and Killian as well, your other brother, who have a few fans in the audience. they'll be helping out to manage the cattle. But what kind of work is involved in herding there over the winter?
Yeah, like I say, it's one Wintridge, and Kieran and Rames normally, myself, well, less so myself, normally taking in turns to look after different Wintridges. So it's up maybe once, maybe twice a week, getting closer to springtime when they're close to calving. But it's up, find the cattle first of all, make sure they're okay, and then check, see if there's still enough grazing, and that'll kind of determine what happens next, whether they need to be brought home a little bit sooner or later, or moved around a little bit more. So you really need to read the landscape as you go up there every week. We when they're coming back down for calving, normally to come back down in batches, maybe 5 or 6 as they get closer to calving. Cow normally calves around the same time every year, so we bring them closer to home, and they'll be kind of looked after a bit more and getting a little bit of silage and get round the clock treatments as they come close to calving. But during the winter time, at this time of the year, for the next couple of months, it's up every week onto the different Wintridges just to check that they're all okay and still healthy and fit and happy out. So that's the main bulk of it. It's up and down those mountains week in, week out. And
we mentioned before, I think Michael did, about bone breaks. Not too common occurrence for an animal to break a leg up there, but if they do injure a limb up there, is it a case of having to put them down, or can they be fixed? Can they be helped in any way? They're a long way from any roads, obviously, and tractors and machinery and anything like that. But what do you do in a situation like that, Shane?
Yeah, thankfully it doesn't really happen all that often for us. We've been very lucky in that sense. The cattle we put up are quite fit and healthy and know how to move around the landscape. So it really depends on how bad it is. Sometimes they can come down on their own. Really take them down in parts, maybe a part today and a part tomorrow, and so on. Thankfully it hasn't had to happen all that often, so we've been quite lucky in that sense. But it can happen. It's a rough terrain, so you really need animals that are able to manage it.
And Shane, we're going to wind off now. I know there's a few little images to show still, but growing up, because we're going to talk about your role as a children's writer as well. Growing up, a children's book writer. Growing up in Fanore, does the landscape influence you and your current profession and what you do and why you do it? Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
It certainly does. Anytime I'm ever asked for any job I've ever applied for, the first thing I always tell them on my CV is that I'm from Davoren and from Blackhead, and that's the background to from where I'm coming from. It's a very large part of who I am. I think we're growing up on Blackhead. Obviously, you're immersed in it, and particularly growing up in our family, you're immersed in it. My father and grandfather and many generations before them were great cattle, great stockmen, and really knew their land, and were very, very proud of that. And that is something, I suppose, that's been instilled in all of us. I used to get in trouble a fair bit when we were told to go out and herd animals, cattle or sheep, because a lot of the time I'd spend looking at the flowers on the ground around me, or insects or birds or something else, because that's just an interest for me, and that's how I ended up becoming biodiversity officer, first for County Clare and then subsequently for Dublin City, and that's kind of where the interest of nature comes from, is from growing up on Blackhead. And in those roles, a large part of it was education and awareness, and how do you explain something scientific to all audiences, young and old. And I've always enjoyed writing, and I started writing children's stories, and it seems to have worked very well. So I've actually published 4 children's books based on nature, and try to engage children with nature on their own doorstep.
And Shane, the most recent publication is The Calf and the Cuckoo. So to finish off, could you tell us a bit about the book, and could you also maybe do us the great honour of reading a passage or two from it, and then when you're finished, myself and Pranjali will just say a few words to close and maybe share a few comments.
Certainly will. I hope you can see it. It's called Burn Tales, The Calf and the Cuckoo. And I suppose what makes it different from the other books is the others are kind of more creation, whereas this is probably more personal experience from growing up on Blackhead. There's a lot of little features in the book that are experience that I would have had growing up, going out in the middle of the night on March or April morning to check if there's any cows calving, and sometimes you get out there on a lovely mild night and the moon is full and it's reflecting off the limestone and fossils and the sea in the background, and you're out there, as Aoife said earlier, you're out there on your own and there's nobody else in the world as far as you're concerned, and being out in the landscape at night time and the mild night is beautiful. Other times it might be getting a fresh bale of hay, and even the following spring, March and April, when you get a good bale and pull out a piece of hay from the middle of the bale and give it a sniff, it still smells sweet. You can still smell the summer, and that's a part of the story that comes in here as well. So it's very much a case of trying to, I suppose, explain our way of life to children. I know yourself included, I've written many scientific papers on Wintridge, on farming in the Burren, and absolutely excellent. But I suppose I just try to look at it in a slightly different way and look at it from the perspective of the animals and the farmers. The story is about a young short-horn calf called Sarah, who is born and raised in Blackhead and thinks she knows about it than anyone else. But then she has a chance encounter with a cuckoo called Colin and discovers what the Burren is really famous for. But there's a secondary character in that story that's kind of in the background for most of it, and that's Sarah's farmer, the Burren farmer, and he comes into play near the end, and we just quickly discover that it's the role of the farmer is the reason why the Burren looks like it does today. It's the role of the farmer that is responsible for the conservation of an incredible landscape like the Burren and Blackhead, and that's my own family and all the panelists here today and many others. So it's I hope the story does dim justice. It's probably a bit more pressure on me compared to my other books. I don't think I'll get as judged as much for the other books. For this one, it's very much about home and Burren, and I hope I did the Burren farmers a bit of justice in it.
I think so, Shane.
Read you a few lines from it, if that's okay.
That'd be great. And just to say that I know that it's a story that's very close to your heart, Shane. You put a lot into that book, and it's just beautiful. And we're so grateful to you for donating the proceeds of the book to the Burren Trust. And there's a link in the chat box where you can actually buy the book online, and we'll send it out to you. And I could also like to thank Gordon Darcy, who's a great guy, lives here in the Burren and has done all the illustrations, again, courtesy of as a donation to the Burren Trust. So Shane, we'll maybe hear a little bit to whet our appetite for the book, a little reading from you right now.
Yeah, so this is takes place about halfway through the book when Sarah decides to leave her field in the middle of the night and travel back to Blackhead to see if Colin was telling the truth and if the Burren flowers really were there. Then, just as the sun was waking up, she finally reached the top of Blackhead Mountain. Down below her, she could see Galway Bay shimmering in the morning light. But as the sun peeled away the shadows from Blackhead, Sarah's eyes opened wide in amazement. This was not the Blackhead she had left behind just a few weeks earlier. There were flowers everywhere, filling every space between the limestone pavements. It was like 1,000 tiny rainbows glittering in a grey sky. Gentians, orchids, and birds for trefoil, mountain avens, milkwort, and bloody cranespill. So I won't disclose any more than that. I've already done a reading the other night, but it's I hope, like I say, it does justice to the Burren and to the farmers at the Burren, and hopefully share a story with our story with everyone else reading it.
Thanks so much, Shane. That's wonderful, beautiful, evocative piece. Just to finish off, and I'm going to hand to Pranjali in a moment to close and maybe share a few comments from the chat box, but I just want to say thanks to a few people. Thanks so much to the Casey family, to those that are with us and those that have gone before us, Jack and Joe, to Maureen, Shane, his brothers Killian and Kieran, and the next generation of young Caseys, some of whom were around yesterday. It's great to see so many of them, and it's just the epitome of, I suppose, we talk about land management sustainability, because they're making a living from the farm. They're such a great widespread family who are so involved in the community. and delivering such an important service to all of us. And I know a lot of tourists pass by and enjoy Blackheads, courtesy of the Casey family, their generosity. They're amazing people, and I'm so delighted to work with them here this year for the Burren Wintridge Festival. I'd also like to thank our other farmers, Michael Davoren, for great leadership and support as always, for Patsy Kurukin, fantastic, to Shirley for her beautiful interlude, for Aoife on top of the mountain. I hope you get down soon, Aoife, safely. And I'd like to pay particular thanks to my colleague Donald Hogan. Donald's great. He managed to film a bunch of that stuff yesterday. I think spent half of last night and this morning pulling the pieces together. I'd like to thank him sincerely, and also Johnny White, who's a great filmmaker, does all the Farm to Nature films for us, and did that recording piece yesterday, running up the mountain headed to the cattle. It wasn't easy, so thanks as well to him. I'd also like to thank FBD Insurance, who've been very kind in supporting this event. This cattle drove, and also for the Part in the Bag, who've been very supportive for the Burren Winterage School. We're going to create a nice short film on Wintridge, because it's hard to show it online, but we're going to create a nice short film, maybe 15-20 minutes over the coming weeks, and we'll share that with you. So it'll be something to look forward to over the winter. So thank you all very much. I'm going to hand back to Pranjali now to close off the meeting. Pranjali.
Thank you, Brendan, and for the vote of thanks for all our big supporters, farmers in the Burren and the team at the Burren Programme. Just want to say a final word of thanks to our audience who are tuning in this afternoon from Cork and Limerick and Dublin and Wales and Italy and Wisconsin in America and Connecticut. So we are so thrilled that you're joining us today to show your virtual support for all that we do here in the Burren. So thank you so much for joining us. It's a very different cattle drive. My colleague, there's the comment from Anya Bird that sums it all. What a brilliant marking of this annual celebration. You can't beat the real thing. I'm particularly missing the tea and the scones, but this is coming close. Well done to all. So we are also thinking today of our big army of volunteers that help us every year to carry out the live event, and making teas and coffees and helping people park and all sorts of things, that the help that we need when doing a live event. But this comes very close. So a final word of thanks. And if you'd like to know more about all the rest of the work that Burren Trust does during the year after the Wintridge and before, like the education work we do in schools, please check out our website, burrenbureau.com. So I'll leave you with that, and have a great evening this Sunday.